And then there was this woman coming towards me, and she was like, you have to get away from here, because if you don't get away from here, they will come for you. And you don't want to be here when they come for you. You're not safe here. The city of Colón was founded in 1850 by the United States of America as an Atlantic terminal for the Panama Railroad, which at that time was used for transportation of gold during the gold rush era as a fast route to California. Despite much of the city being destroyed twice by fire, the population grew and economy rised during the canal construction. But then things changed in the late 1960s. The city lost a lot of its jobs in the port due to conversion to freight containers. The consequence of this? The city's decline and an economic depression, further amplified by military dictatorships of Omar Torrijos and Manuel Noriega. The city experienced riots, rise of unemployment and criminality, upper and middle class residents leaving to Panama City, and the decay of the city's buildings. Colón faded into irrelevance.
Gunshots rang out in the Panamanian city of Colón on Monday. A similar protest in Colón last week left as many as 3 dead, including a 9-year-old boy.
Today, Colón is dominated by an Afro-American community. The unemployment rate is at 40%, and the poverty rate is even higher. Colón is known for its high crime rate, and it is also known to be one of Latin America's, some even say of the world's, most dangerous areas. Most guidebooks recommend not going to Colón. Despite all this, in September of 2022, some white boy from Germany who had never even been to Latin America before was sent to Colón to do his volunteer service there. I mean, just look at him. How is he supposed to survive this? Well, it seems like he did. And so here I am, and this is my story of living in Colón, Panama, known to be one of Latin America's most dangerous areas. Before going to Colón, I remember one situation in specific where I was like looking up something about Colón in a book, and I remember how it literally said, well, there's some nice beaches there, but like in general, you shouldn't go there because it's not nice and because it's not safe. And I think it kind of got to the point where I just didn't have much expectations going to Colón. But at the same time, I was kind of excited because this whole story of the economic decline and the situation right now, it was quite interesting for me. So I didn't have much expectations, but it wasn't like I was going there with fear or anxiety. I was more excited to go actually. So when I actually got to Colón, I think I experienced something that you might call a culture shock. Because of course I knew that things are different where I was going, but actually getting there, actually seeing it was a whole different story. Now the whole region of Colón, with some exceptions, it's quite poor. So the houses are really simple, a lot of the houses are run down. Things don't work the way I was used to it from Germany. For example, when there was heavy rain, and there was a lot of heavy rain, the streets of Colón were basically just flooded. I remember one situation in specific where I was in Colón in the city and a man was running towards me and he was wet like up to his hips because he just came from a different street and water had risen so high. Yeah, that was crazy. That was like one of my first days and I just really started to realize, okay, things don't work the same as in Germany right here. Another thing that I noticed was the trash, unfortunately, and this is a problem in not only in Colón, not only in Panama, it's a problem in a lot of countries. There's a lot of trash on the streets in Panama and in Colón in specific, in the poor areas, and there's like huge amounts of trash like right next to the street or right like in the middle of the city, literally in the middle of the city. There's so much trash. Another thing that I found really difficult was the noise, not only from the traffic, and there's a lot of traffic in Colón, especially in Sabanitas, but also the noise in the buses or in certain buildings, because the music is so loud there. And when I say loud, I mean loud. Like sometimes it depends on the driver, but sometimes I was sitting in a bus and I literally felt like I was in a club. Now, towards the end of my stay, things kind of escalated because there was a problem with the public water supply. So during the last week of my stay, we didn't have water. We couldn't shower, we couldn't use the toilet, and that was a problem of like a whole region of Colón. The whole region of Sabanitas was out of water. And at that point I actually started realizing how much you actually need water, like for all types of things in your everyday life. And not having water made things really, really difficult at that time. At that time in Colón, I was the only volunteer from Germany in the whole region. There were other regions where there were like multiple volunteers, but in my region, in Colón, I was the only one. At the same time, for like the first 2 weeks of my stay, I didn't see a single other white person in all of Colón. At the same time, I had to speak Spanish all the time because nobody could really speak English, which I heard later is actually not typical for the region. I'm not saying that it was a bad thing because it really improved my Spanish, but it also really added to me feeling like a foreigner, like a stranger. Feeling foreign, feeling like a stranger was actually one of the most dominant feelings at that time, because so much was new, like the language, food, the way the people looked, the way the people behaved. And so I was constantly having this feeling of I do not belong here, I'm a stranger, I'm a foreigner. People were also constantly like staring at me because in Colón, or in the area where I lived, it wasn't normal to see a white person on the streets. So of course people were looking at me all the time, which in general, I don't have a problem with, but if it happens every day and all the time, there comes a point when it's just exhausting. And it's a whole different thing whether you just, travel to a certain place with your friends, with your family and spend a couple of weeks there, or whether you actually live there and whether that's actually your living reality. Because I've traveled quite a lot in my life so far, and I've been to places that were like really, really different from Germany. But I never felt so foreign like I did in Panama, because in Panama that was actually my home at that time. So not having anything familiar around me was quite hard. I remember that whenever there was like something that was just a little bit familiar, I was really enjoying it. For example, I remember how I would just go into the supermarket sometimes, because supermarket is not that much different from the supermarkets in Germany. Another example for this is when I saw another white dude who was selling things on the streets. So I approached him and I asked him, and he was from Spain. And I remember how much familiar this guy felt to me just because he was born in Europe. I mean, if I'm in Germany and if I meet someone from Spain, it's not like that person is familiar to me or that person represents home to me or anything. But when I was in Panama, that guy from Spain was actually the most familiar thing that I had at that time. Now, like I said, all that was exhausting a lot of times, but at the same time, it was also teaching me a lot of things to really take like full responsibility of my own life and of myself, because there was no one around me who could do that for me or who would do that for me. Another thing that I learned was how much I can actually be grateful for the things that I have in Germany. When I returned home here, I was appreciating things much more than I had in the past. And another thing that I started to realize when I was in Panama is how difficult it actually is to go to a completely foreign country and live there. And I mean, I was going there voluntarily and only for a certain time, but there's people who have to leave their home and who cannot go back. And I had to think about that a lot of times when I was in Panama, how much respect I actually have for people who have to do that and who are able to overcome all these struggles that come with doing that. So I'm gonna say it straight ahead. I never really felt insecure during my time in Colón. There was one situation, I'm going to talk about it later, but the topic of insecurity was still present all the time. Because whether it was my host family, colleagues at work, other volunteers, other people that I met in Colón or outside of Colón, everyone was constantly telling me how insecure it is. And for example, whenever I was outside of Colón and I was talking to someone from Panama and I was telling them that I was living in Colón, they were always shocked and they always could barely believe that I was actually living there. Because from their perspective, that was like a region where a white person should not live. You also read about it, or on the news you heard about shootings, about people dying in the area. There's also everyday situations. Sometimes when I was in the store, someone who was working there was constantly following me because they expected me to steal something. And you can imagine that you don't really feel comfortable in a store where someone is following you all the time. Another thing that really showed me how dangerous the whole area can be is the police controls or the military controls. When you drive through Colón at night, at certain points there's like military checkpoints. There's like heavily armed people who just control the cars. Often I was in a car and then I would notice the car getting slower and then the driver turned on the lights in the car and then we passed this checkpoint. That was crazy for me because the only time that I had actually seen or experienced something like this was when I was in Jordan a couple years ago. And we were very close to the border with Syria. And it wasn't just the military checkpoints, it was also the fact that whether it was the rangers or people in front of the bank or policemen, everyone was armed with really heavy weapons. Every person who protected something in Colón was wearing heavy arms. At the office, sometimes the rangers came in, they all had machine guns with them. And you get used to it, but at the same time, it makes sure that you don't forget what type of place you're living in. Now, as a consequence of everything that I just talked about, I was not really allowed to go out on my own. That was one of the first things that my host mother told me. Also, whenever I left the house, I had to carefully think about what type of valuables I wanted to take with me, because there was always this risk that someone would rob you, and as a consequence, I was constantly feeling some sort of tension. Like, I was never completely relaxed, or I never really felt completely free or independent. Also, whenever I was walking outside in the streets, I really had to think carefully where I wanted to go, where I felt it was safe. And I was also constantly, watching the people around me, trying to get a feeling of whether they could be a threat to me or not. You start to really analyze things around you. There was one time when I was lying in my bed at night and I heard shooting outside. That was probably a moment where I was kind of anxious just because it was so real all of a sudden. There was one time where I was taking the bus home, or I believed I was taking the bus home, but it turned out that I had taken the wrong bus. So the bus was driving into some sort of village outside of Colón. It looked like what you would typically call a ghetto. I was getting off the bus because I had to, because it was the last station and the bus driver told everyone to get off the bus. And I looked around and then there was this woman coming towards me and she was like, you have to get away from here, because if you don't get away from here, they will come for you. And you don't want to be here when they come for you. You're not safe here. And that was probably the only time where I was actually really scared. She then showed me how to get out of there as fast as possible, which I was quite lucky, I think. And also that day when I came home, my host mother told me that she was worried that I'd taken the bus to, I'm not going to say the name of the village, but that village where I actually went. And she was so scared because she told me that this place is so dangerous. And again, this was really difficult, but it also taught me how much I can actually be grateful for the fact that I can walk around in Germany in most of the areas and feel safe. You can believe me that it actually has a huge impact on you if you are not able to go out, or if you're not able to go out and feel safe. It really changes something in you, and it really has an impact on you, and I can tell you that it doesn't feel good. Now, all this might leave quite a negative impression of life there and of my experience there, but actually there was also a lot of positive things about Cologne. One major thing that I definitely want to mention is the way the people treated me. Everyone was really nice, everyone was helpful, everyone was interested in me, having a conversation with me. That was really nice because I was able to connect to a lot of people, hear a lot of stories, get to know a lot of things about the area, about the history, about the good and the bad things. For example, one time I was just walking by a basketball court. I was just watching them play, and the coach, he like instantly came to me and he asked me whether I wanted to join them or whether I wanted to train with them in the future. And I never had someone who was like really offensive or who was trying to sell me something or who was trying to hurt me or rob me in any way. Like, everyone was always super nice. Also, the region of Colón has some really beautiful places, like old Spanish fortresses like Portobello. There's national parks like San Lorenzo or Lago Gatun. There's the canal. There's really beautiful beaches that I went to. If you want to see more of this, you can also check out my other videos about Panama. So yeah, there's a lot of contrasts in Colón. There's really beautiful places, really ugly places, and there's really nice people, and then there's dangerous people. Though I don't want to like categorize people into those two categories, but those things form quite a stark contrast in Colón. Now, what's my personal conclusion from all this? Well, it was definitely a crazy experience, most likely the craziest experience of my life so far. And I look at it with mixed feelings, because on the one hand I met a lot of really nice people and saw a lot of really beautiful places. On the other hand, I also went through some really difficult times with the things that I experienced there. But I think what I learned in general is that difficult times and difficult situations are often the most valuable situations and times in your life. Looking at it from a wider perspective, looking at it from the perspective of your way in life, because they develop you as a person, they teach you a lot of things, and they can sometimes really change the way you see things in life. And I mean, finally, nothing really happened to me, but of course, I don't know whether that's just me being lucky or because I didn't spend enough time there. When I talk about my experience with people, they often assume that I look at my time in Colón in a rather negative way, but actually I'm super grateful that I made this experience and that I got that opportunity. But at the same time, I'm also grateful to be back in Germany right now, or to be out of that situation. So when people ask me whether I can recommend doing something like this, I really don't know whether I can recommend it. I really don't know. Alright, so if you have been or are in a similar situation, or if you just want to add an idea or a thought or a question to something I said, then you can just write me a comment. And also, if you liked the video, I would really appreciate you hitting the like button, because there's a lot of work going into those videos. If you want to see more content from Panama, you can check out the channel. If you don't want to miss any further videos about Panama, about my experience in Panama, about whatever, then you should subscribe to the channel. And yeah, that's basically it. Adios. I'm really missing a cool Spanish saying for the end.